In the unforgiving Arizona desert of 1871, where the sun beats down relentlessly on the land, a chilling tale unfolded, one that would remain hidden for nearly a century. Beneath the scorching heat and harsh winds, something far darker than the blazing sun was at play. This is the story of two sisters, Margaret and Elizabeth McKenzie, who ran an establishment that served more than just whiskey and beer. Bumblebee Creek, a remote settlement barely clinging to life, was home to the Copper Queen, a saloon and boarding house that promised weary travelers respite from the rugged wilderness. But those who stopped at the Copper Queen soon found themselves at the center of a series of strange disappearances that would puzzle authorities for years. The McKenzie sisters, though seemingly respectable businesswomen, were not newcomers to the frontier. They arrived in Arizona under mysterious circumstances, with resources and influence that didn't quite match their modest backgrounds. They purchased the Copper Queen with cash, a method of payment that raised eyebrows in a land where financial dealings were often done by barter or credit. Yet, no one questioned their origins, and their business quickly gained a reputation for offering a level of refinement that was unheard of in such a rough, lawless land. While the settlers and miners of Arizona's 1870s frontier had grown accustomed to danger and death, the Mackenzies' presence marked the beginning of a new kind of terror. What started as a business venture would soon turn into a series of unspeakable crimes, and the Copper Queen would become known for something far darker than its clean rooms and hearty meals. As we unravel the history of the Copper Queen and the McKenzie sisters, we will uncover secrets that were carefully hidden behind the walls of their establishment, secrets that were meant to stay buried in the dust of Arizona. Join us as we journey into the heart of one of the most disturbing cases in Wild West history. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and leave a comment below. Let us know where you're watching from and share your thoughts on this twisted piece of history. Stay tuned to Grave of the Shadows for more chilling tales from the past. In 1871, Arizona was still a wild, untamed land, far from the settled territories of the East. It was a time of great opportunity and even greater peril, a land where dreams were built and broken beneath the oppressive desert sun. The Arizona Territory, established just 8 years earlier, was still in its infancy, struggling to carve out an identity amidst the lawlessness and the remnants of the Apache Wars. The promise of riches from copper, silver, and gold had lured men from all across the United States, but it was also a place where danger lurked around every corner. Arizona in the early 1870s was a place where law and order were often distant ideals, not tangible realities. The Southern Pacific Railroad had yet to cross the vast desert, leaving travel a grueling endeavor. Communication was sporadic, and settlers had to rely on each other and a minimal government presence to survive. Military outposts, like Fort Whipple near Prescott, were stationed throughout the territory, but they offered little protection in a land that was growing both rapidly and dangerously. At the heart of this untamed landscape was Prescott, the territory's capital, still struggling to maintain its position of influence against the growing presence of Tucson to the south. Though the mining boom was yet to fully take hold in places like Tombstone, Arizona was already a rough frontier, dotted with small settlements and burgeoning towns. Communities like Bumblebee Creek, located about 17 miles northeast of Prescott, were the lifeblood of the territory. It was a place where men seeking fortune mingled with those looking to escape from the law, where even the most humble establishments could hide dark secrets behind closed doors. Despite its reputation for lawlessness, Bumblebee Creek was no different. Once a promising mining outpost after copper was discovered in nearby hills, the settlement had seen its fair share of violence. By 1871, however, its future was uncertain. As miners moved on to more prosperous locations, Bumblebee Creek's role as a strategic stopover on the route to the northern mines became more apparent. It was a natural resting point for travelers making their way to and from Prescott, offering a brief respite from the harsh conditions of the desert. It was within this environment of limited oversight and growing opportunity that the McKenzie sisters arrived in 1872. Their arrival in Bumblebee Creek seemed to be the answer to the area's need for more civilized accommodations, an establishment that could cater to both the working-class miners and the more refined businesspeople passing through. The Copper Queen Saloon, with its clean rooms, well-cooked meals, and stringent rules of conduct, quickly gained a reputation as the most respectable business in the area. But beneath the polished exterior, something darker was taking root. The McKenzie sisters, who had seemingly appeared out of nowhere, seemed to fit perfectly into the frontier's peculiar social dynamics. In a time when women were rare in such environments, their success was almost immediate. They built relationships with prominent locals, ensured their establishment was always well maintained, and operated with an air of refinement that attracted men of means, those who could be easily manipulated. The frontier, with its rough edges and precarious balance of power, provided the perfect cover for the sisters' operation. While others struggled to survive in this harsh, often dangerous environment, the McKenzies thrived. Yet, as their business flourished, so did the whispers of something amiss in Bumblebee Creek. In the spring of 1872, two women appeared in Bumblebee Creek, seemingly out of nowhere. Their arrival was unusual, not just because women were a rarity in Arizona's rugged frontier, but because of the resources they brought with them. Margaret and Elizabeth McKenzie, two sisters from Missouri, quickly established themselves in business, setting up the Copper Queen Saloon and boarding house, a venture that would soon earn a reputation for offering comfort and refinement far beyond what the region had ever seen. At first, their arrival seemed unremarkable. The local newspaper made a brief mention of the two respectable women who had opened a business catering to travelers, providing clean accommodations and hearty meals. The piece was polite, but vague, and failed to mention the sisters' past, their financial backing, or any details about their true intentions. They were described as well-spoken and poised, fitting perfectly into the frontier's delicate social fabric, which expected both civility and survival in equal measure. However, a closer look at their background would soon raise questions. Margaret, the older of the two sisters at 27, was a striking figure with auburn hair and a commanding presence. She quickly became the face of the Copper Queen, managing the saloon with an air of authority that earned her the respect of the local men. Elizabeth, only 25, was more reserved, often seen in the background, silently observing the goings-on at the saloon and attending to the guests. While Margaret's presence could be likened to a magnet, drawing in men with her charm and ease, Elizabeth was the more efficient, meticulous one. Together, they formed an unusual partnership, a duo that blended charisma with careful planning. What was most peculiar about the McKenzies, however, was their sudden wealth. Their business was established with cash, a method of payment that was rare in a time when credit was more common and far more dangerous. The Copper Queen was built with resources far beyond what would have been expected from two women traveling alone. Local records would later reveal that the sisters had purchased the property with no visible means of income, and no one seemed to question it at the time. Inquiries about their background, even from Missouri, revealed no record of the sisters from the counties they claimed to have come from. It was as if they had materialized out of the desert's dust. Despite these oddities, the sisters were accepted into the small community without much suspicion. Their business flourished, attracting a steady stream of travelers, miners, businesspeople, and those who appreciated the comfort the Copper Queen provided. The sisters became known figures in Bumblebee Creek, polite and businesslike, with their well-maintained establishment standing in stark contrast to the rough, often disorderly saloons found elsewhere in the territory. But beneath the calm exterior of the Copper Queen, something far more sinister was unfolding. As the sisters continued to build their reputation in business, they also began to draw the attention of those whose presence was less easily explained. Something in the air hinted that the McKenzie sisters were more than just businesswomen. They were predators, operating under the guise of civility. Nestled on the edge of the small and struggling Bumblebee Creek, the Copper Queen Saloon stood as a testament to refinement amidst the raw, unrefined chaos of the frontier. A two-story building of solid construction, it was unlike any other establishment in the Arizona territory. While other saloons were rough, crude, and chaotic, the Copper Queen offered an air of sophistication that set it apart. It quickly became the jewel of Bumblebee Creek, a rare oasis of comfort in a land where lawlessness and violence often ruled the day. The saloon was the centerpiece of the McKenzie sisters' operation, serving both as a place to drink and gamble, as well as a boarding house for weary travelers. The The ground floor was devoted to the bar and dining area, with polished wooden floors, fine glass windows, and luxuriously upholstered furniture. To many, it appeared as though the McKenzie sisters had transported a touch of civilization from back east to the barren desert of Arizona. The saloon boasted quality whiskey and served hearty meals at regular hours, an unusual practice in a land where food and drink often came without a schedule. The second floor of the Copper Queen was dedicated to lodging. The rooms were described as clean, with pressed linens and real furniture, which was rare in the frontier. It was the kind of place that attracted travelers of means, men with money to spend on comfort after long days of grueling travel through the harsh desert. The McKenzie's strict rules about drunkenness and lewd conduct made the saloon an inviting place for businesspeople, investors, and even lawyers, all of whom were seeking a moment of civility amidst the lawless conditions of the frontier. Despite the decorum of the Copper Queen, there were signs that not all was as it seemed. The saloon's design was odd for a frontier establishment. There were reinforced floors and secret compartments hidden behind false walls and wardrobes. The McKenzie sisters had hired local laborers to make extensive renovations shortly after acquiring the building, paying in cash for the work to be completed quickly. Workers recalled strange requests, such as a reinforced floor in the back room and a false back in a wardrobe, which they assumed were for protection against Apache raids. At the time, no one thought much of it. In the unforgiving landscape of the frontier, strange requests were often chalked up to the paranoia that came with the constant threat of attack. But now, looking back, those renovations would take on a much more sinister meaning. It would later be revealed that the McKenzie sisters had carefully constructed hidden spaces within the saloon, spaces that would soon become their tools for carrying out unspeakable crimes. The building, once a symbol of comfort and prosperity, would soon become known as the heart of a macabre operation, a place where the McKenzies would lure victims, make them feel welcome, and then eliminate them. Margaret McKenzie was often seen at the bar, charming patrons with her magnetic presence. She had a natural ability to make others feel at ease, drawing out their secrets with casual conversation, making them feel like old friends. Meanwhile, Elizabeth remained more reserved, quietly attending to the boarding house side of the operation. Though she spoke little, her sharp eyes missed nothing. It was this dynamic between the two sisters, Margaret's outgoing, personable nature and Elizabeth's quiet, efficient demeanor, that allowed them to run their operation with chilling precision. It was not just the luxury of the Copper Queen that made it stand out. It was also the clientele it attracted. While the rough miners and cowboys still visited, the sisters' strict rules about conduct meant that their business also drew more affluent and transient visitors. Businessmen, investors, and attorneys all made their way through Bumblebee Creek and found themselves staying at the Copper Queen. These were the men the McKenzie sisters had set their sights on, men traveling alone, with money to spend and no one to notice if they disappeared. In the beginning, the Copper Queen operated smoothly, offering both hospitality and an eerie level of civility. But as the McKenzie sisters grew more comfortable, their true nature began to emerge. Behind the curtains of civility, something far darker was taking shape. By the summer of 1873, Bumblebee Creek had already established itself as a peculiar and unsettling place, and the Copper Queen Saloon, once a symbol of prosperity, was beginning to draw the attention of local authorities. It was a quiet settlement, and when strange things began to happen, they didn't immediately draw much attention. The McKenzie sisters, meanwhile, maintained their image as respectable businesswomen, never causing a stir, always gracious, and always polite. However, as time went on, a series of strange disappearances began to disturb the community, a pattern that seemed all too deliberate. The first sign that something was wrong came with the disappearance of Gerald Whitman, a well-known mining investor from San Francisco. Whitman had arrived in the Arizona Territory in the summer of 1873, intending to evaluate several mining claims in the region. His last letter to his wife mentioned that he had been staying at an establishment run by two sisters, which seemed an odd but harmless detail. However, after his disappearance, his wife, Mrs. Eleanor Whitman, filed a complaint with the Territorial Marshal's office, seeking answers. At first, the investigation seemed perfunctory. The Territorial Marshal concluded that Whitman had likely continued his journey to the southern mines or even Mexico. His luggage, however, remained at the Copper Queen. When the sisters were questioned, they produced a note supposedly written by Whitman, saying that he had left early, thanking them for their hospitality, and stating that he had decided to head directly to Tucson. However, Mrs. Whitman noticed that the handwriting on the note didn't match her husband's. Deputy Marshal James Corian, who was involved in the inquiry, was skeptical of the sisters' account. He took note of a few inconsistencies in their story, but official action was slow. In his private journal, Corian recorded his suspicions, observing that something about the McKenzie sisters' behavior seemed rehearsed, too perfect. He also noted that Whitman had been carrying a significant amount of money, nearly $5,000 in bank drafts and gold coin, and wondered where it had gone. When inquiries were made to the local bank in Prescott, no record of Whitman's drafts could be found. Whitman was the first man to disappear, but he would not be the last. Over the next year, at least 6 more men, all of means and traveling alone, would disappear after staying at the Copper Queen. Each time, the same pattern unfolded. The man would arrive, stay at the saloon, and then vanish without a trace. When inquiries were made, the McKenzies would produce notes supposedly written by the missing men, claiming they had left suddenly or had changed their travel plans. The local authorities, distracted by the daily challenges of frontier life, accepted these explanations without question. But whispers began to spread through the small community. People started to notice that the same type of guest always seemed to disappear. They were men of wealth or importance, investors, businessmen, and attorneys, who would travel alone, often with substantial sums of money. Their disappearances were always explained away by the McKenzies, but the stories didn't sit right with the local residents. More than once, people remarked on how the sisters seemed to pay particular attention to certain guests, those traveling alone, those carrying large amounts of money. The more the disappearances mounted, the more the suspicion grew, but the fear of confronting the McKenzie sisters, who were deeply embedded in the community, kept most people silent. One former resident, interviewed decades later, recalled that his grandfather had warned him about the Copper Queen and its proprietors. "We knew something wasn't right with those women," he said. "They'd always single out certain travelers, always the ones traveling alone, always the ones who seemed to have money. But nobody said nothing. Back then, if you minded your business, you stayed alive." It wasn't just the residents of Bumblebee Creek who began to notice the pattern. The disappearance of wealthy men had caught the attention of officials from Prescott, and soon a quiet investigation began to take shape. But it would take more than suspicion to unearth the truth behind the McKenzie sisters' deadly business. As the months passed and more men disappeared, the community around Bumblebee Creek began to take notice. The McKenzie sisters' establishment, once a model of civility in the frontier, was now shrouded in suspicion. While many of the disappearances were written off as common frontier accidents, a growing sense of unease spread through the small community. Something about the McKenzies' behavior was too perfect, too calculated. It wasn't just the disappearances. It was the sisters' ability to charm their victims, to make them feel at ease before they vanished without a trace. Deputy Marshal James Corian, a seasoned officer tasked with investigating the disappearance of Gerald Whitman, couldn't shake his suspicions. Something didn't add up. Whitman, a man of considerable wealth, had simply vanished without a trace, and the only explanation the McKenzies offered was that he had decided to leave early. But as Corian dug deeper into the case, he began to uncover troubling inconsistencies in their story. The note they had produced, supposedly written by Whitman, seemed to have been written in a manner too rehearsed, as though it were part of a script the sisters followed for every missing guest. Corian's investigation was slow and deliberate, and as he continued to question the McKenzies' business practices, he discovered more suspicious behavior. It wasn't just Whitman who had disappeared. Several other men of means had stayed at the Copper Queen and never checked out. When Corian cross-referenced their names with local records, he found nothing but silence. No one knew where these men had gone or why they had vanished. What troubled Corian even more was the fact that the McKenzies had seemingly gone out of their way to make sure their guests were comfortable and well cared for, only to have them disappear without a trace. The more he learned about the McKenzies' operations, the more suspicious he became. At the same time, the McKenzie's reputation among the local community remained relatively untouched. Despite growing whispers, they continued to host important visitors, businessmen, merchants, and attorneys, who passed through Bumblebee Creek. The Copper Queen remained a symbol of refinement in an otherwise harsh environment, and its reputation for high-quality service and hospitality only made the disappearance of its guests seem all the more baffling. As a result, local authorities were hesitant to act. The McKenzies had been careful to cultivate connections with prominent figures in the territory, and their influence in the small community made it difficult for anyone to raise an official alarm. However, as more and more victims vanished, and with no bodies or signs of foul play to speak of, whispers of something far more sinister began to circulate. Some local residents, like Harriet Schultz, whose father ran the local general store, began to share troubling observations. Her father had noticed a pattern in the sisters' behavior. Whenever a certain type of guest stayed at the Copper Queen, a businessman often traveling alone, Margaret McKenzie would make unusual requests at the store, purchasing supplies that seemed excessive for a simple saloon. On one occasion, she bought extra soap and coal oil, claiming that a guest had complained of a rat in his room. Another time, she came to buy a saw and shovel well after dark, explaining that a guest needed them to fix a broken door. What struck Harriet's father as strange, however, was that Margaret's hands had been stained that night, something she never explained. After that, Margaret wore gloves whenever she came to the store. Still, no one spoke up openly about their suspicions, and the McKenzie sisters continued to run their business as usual. But it was only a matter of time before someone would begin to ask questions that couldn't be answered so easily. In the fall of 1873, an inquiry was officially launched into the disappearances, largely prompted by the persistence of Mrs. Eleanor Whitman. She had not given up on her husband's case, and her relentless pursuit of answers eventually led her to Prescott, where she gathered support from both local businesses and influential figures. But even as the investigation into Whitman's disappearance grew, the McKenzie sisters seemed to maintain their calm demeanor. They produced more forged letters and continued to play the role of the concerned, respectable hosts. Yet behind their serene facade, the pressure was mounting. As the investigation continued to stall, Deputy Marshal Corian became more determined than ever to uncover the truth. He was no longer convinced that the disappearances were merely coincidental. His notes from this period suggest that he was beginning to see a pattern, one that led back to the Copper Queen and its two proprietors, whose charm and calm demeanor were beginning to seem like carefully constructed masks hiding a much darker reality. But the investigation was far from over, and as Corian's suspicions deepened, the McKenzie sisters knew it was only a matter of time before their secrets would come to light. The discovery of the hidden room in the Copper Queen Saloon would prove to be the tipping point in a case that had grown more unsettling with every passing month. In February of 1874, an unexpected event would reveal the truth behind the McKenzie sisters' deadly business. Their operation would no longer remain concealed by the thin veil of civility they had carefully maintained. It all began with a heavy winter storm that swept through the area, bringing with it torrential rains and winds that would alter the course of history for Bumblebee Creek. As the rain poured down, the ground around the Copper Queen began to shift. The hill behind the building, already prone to erosion, began to crack under the pressure of the waterlogged soil. By morning, a large portion of the hillside had collapsed, exposing the foundations of the Copper Queen and, more alarmingly, the hidden secrets beneath. At first, the collapse was thought to be nothing more than a minor inconvenience, a simple cave-in caused by the storm. But when local residents went to investigate, they made a discovery that would send shockwaves through the community. A portion of the land that had once been covered by the hill had now exposed a hidden room, an underground chamber concealed behind the building. What appeared to be a mundane section of the hillside had, in fact, been the McKenzie sisters' grisly secret, concealed beneath layers of earth and timber. The hidden room was small, roughly 8 feet by 10 feet, with a dirt floor that had been sloped towards a narrow tunnel leading out to the creek bed behind the Copper Queen. What struck those who entered the room was the overwhelming sense of dread that seemed to hang in the air, an unsettling presence that could not be ignored. The room was not just a storage space. It had been meticulously designed for a far more sinister purpose. Metal rings were embedded into the walls, evidence that the room had been used to restrain someone, or, more chillingly, multiple people. The room was not built for comfort. It was a space of confinement, a place where the McKenzie sisters had carried out their dark deeds. As the initial investigation progressed, it became clear that the hidden room had been used to house victims, travelers who had checked into the Copper Queen and never checked out. The dirt floor was stained with what appeared to be blood, and traces of coal oil, used to clean the room after its grisly uses, were found soaked into the soil. The cold reality of what had been happening behind the saloon's polished facade began to sink in. The sisters, whose charming hospitality had once won over so many unsuspecting guests, were revealed as the cold-hearted killers they truly were. The discovery of the room was a turning point in the investigation, but it was far from the final revelation. As officials dug deeper into the hidden chamber, they found even more chilling evidence of the McKenzie sisters' operation. A series of small, almost imperceptible compartments hidden within the walls contained items belonging to the victims. Pieces of clothing, watches, letters, and even personal belongings that had been taken from the men who had vanished without a trace. Each item was catalogued, a haunting reminder of the victims whose lives had been violently cut short. But it wasn't just the physical evidence that pointed to the sisters' involvement in the disappearances. What was most disturbing was the systematic nature of their operation. As investigators began to piece together the timeline of events, it became clear that the McKenzie sisters had been selecting their victims with cold precision. They had a pattern, a profile of the men they chose to target. Solitary travelers, men of means, those with money to spend, and no one who would notice their disappearance for some time. They would offer them comfort and security at the Copper Queen, only to drug them, confine them in the hidden room, and eventually eliminate them, robbing them of their wealth, documents, and personal effects. Further inspection of the saloon's records revealed that Margaret McKenzie, the elder sister, had an uncanny ability to remember personal details about the men she interacted with. She would learn about their business ventures, their financial holdings, and their personal lives, all under the guise of casual conversation. Her charm, it seemed, was a tool she used to extract valuable information from her victims, ensuring that she knew exactly what to take from them once they were no longer alive. Elizabeth, the quieter and more methodical sister, would handle the practical side of the operation, preparing the hidden room, disposing of the bodies, and ensuring that no traces of the crime were left behind. The scope of their operation was now undeniable. The McKenzie sisters had been killing for over a year, systematically murdering men who had no idea that their journey would end in the concealed room beneath the Copper Queen. The question now became not just how many victims there had been, but how long they had been able to operate without detection. The evidence pointed to a carefully executed plan, one that involved not just the sisters' manipulation of their guests, but also their manipulation of the local community. Yet, despite the growing body of evidence, the McKenzie sisters were nowhere to be found. As the investigation into the hidden room continued, it became clear that the sisters had vanished without a trace. The room, once their dark sanctuary, had now become the key to unlocking the truth. But the sisters had already gone, leaving only the echoes of their crimes behind. As the investigation into the McKenzie sisters' crimes deepened, it became clear that the sisters had developed a highly methodical and efficient system for selecting, eliminating, and disposing of their victims. Their operation was not a series of impulsive actions, but rather a well-planned, carefully executed scheme that spanned more than a year. Behind the Copper Queen's seemingly refined and respectable facade lay a criminal enterprise fueled by greed and cold calculation. The McKenzie sisters targeted a very specific type of victim: wealthy men traveling alone, often businessmen, investors, or others of means who were transient by nature. The sisters' ability to identify these men was one of their most chilling talents. Margaret McKenzie, the elder sister, was a master at drawing out information. She was charming and articulate, able to make even the most guarded men feel at ease. Within minutes of engaging in conversation, she would ascertain a visitor's financial background, business interests, and personal circumstances. Her ability to gather this information was crucial for the sisters' operation. Once she knew a potential victim's business dealings or financial holdings, she could ensure that they were selected for the sisters' deadly enterprise. The men she targeted were often traveling alone, without close family or friends nearby who might notice their disappearance. These were individuals whose sudden absence would likely go unnoticed for weeks, even months. Once the sisters had identified their victims, they carefully set the stage for the next phase of their plan. The men would be invited to stay at the Copper Queen, where they would find comfort and safety in a seemingly respectable establishment. The rooms were well maintained, the food was plentiful, and the atmosphere was always polite and hospitable. The sisters went out of their way to make their guests feel welcome, ensuring that they were relaxed and at ease. There were no rough saloon brawls here, just polite conversation, well-served whiskey, and regular meals. But the seemingly welcoming environment was, in fact, a trap. Once the men had settled in and begun to trust the McKenzie sisters, their fate was sealed. The sisters would serve them drinks, often laced with a powerful sedative, ensuring that their victims were incapacitated. Once unconscious, the men would be moved to the hidden room in the back of the saloon, an area no guest had ever seen. The room was small, dark, and designed to hold its victims in a confined space, with metal rings attached to the walls, indicating that it had been used to bind and restrain people. There, the men would be killed, though the exact methods remained speculative. Some experts later suggested that blunt force trauma or strangulation were the most likely causes of death, based on the signs found on the bodies of victims uncovered in later investigations. The Mackenzies were methodical in their killings. No violence was wasted, and no sound was made. Their victims were robbed of valuables, including money, jewelry, and personal documents, which were then used to forge false identities, ensuring that the disappearances would remain unexplained for some time. Elizabeth McKenzie, the younger sister, was responsible for managing the practical side of the operation. While Margaret engaged the guests and gathered information, Elizabeth prepared the rooms, handled the victims after they were drugged, and disposed of the bodies. She was efficient, meticulous, and emotionless in her tasks, ensuring that no trace of the crime was left behind. After the victims were killed, their bodies were often hidden in the creek bed behind the Copper Queen, buried in locations that would be subject to seasonal flooding, further ensuring that the evidence would be washed away. But the sisters didn't stop there. They also kept detailed records, cataloging every victim's identity, the valuables they had acquired, and the methods used to dispose of the bodies. These ledgers, discovered much later, revealed the chilling extent of the McKenzie sisters' operation. The entries were coldly clinical, often referring to their victims as stock, and detailing the amounts of money, property, and documents they had obtained. These records were not just proof of their crimes. They were an indication of the sisters' complete detachment from the human lives they had destroyed. Their operation was a business, not driven by passion or rage, but by a calm, cold calculation. They knew exactly who to target, how to manipulate them, and when to strike. In a land where lawlessness was the norm, the McKenzie sisters had turned murder into an efficient enterprise, one that would continue until a fateful storm revealed the truth behind their carefully constructed facade. By the fall of 1874, the McKenzie sisters had grown increasingly cautious. The discovery of their hidden room, the mounting investigations, and the whispered suspicions had made their position untenable. The final days of the Copper Queen marked the end of their grisly reign, but the exact details of their escape remain shrouded in mystery. What is known, however, is that a combination of growing external pressure and a fortuitous turn of events led to their sudden disappearance. The turning point came with the collapse of the hillside behind the Copper Queen. The storm of February 1874, which had seemed like a mere inconvenience at first, exposed the hidden room and the macabre truth of the McKenzie sisters' operation. As local authorities began to piece together the evidence, it became clear that the sisters had been responsible for the disappearances of at least 10 men, possibly more, over the span of 18 months. The discovery was nothing short of a shock. A small frontier town like Bumblebee Creek had been unaware of the horrors unfolding right under their noses. As news of the discovery spread, the McKenzie sisters knew the end was near. But they did not wait for authorities to come knocking on their door. Within hours of the storm's aftermath, they had packed their belongings and left the Copper Queen behind. Local witnesses recalled seeing two women matching the McKenzie's descriptions boarding a southbound stagecoach late at night, heading for the Mexican border. The sisters had vanished into the night, leaving only the wreckage of their establishment behind them. Their departure was swift and calculated. In the chaos of the storm, they had managed to flee without leaving a trace of their plans. But the McKenzie sisters' escape wasn't just a physical flight from justice. It was also the final chapter of their long history of evading the law. For months, they had manipulated the local community, bribed officials, and used their charm to maintain their position of power. Their escape was, in many ways, the culmination of their ability to operate in plain sight for so long. Though the McKenzie sisters had disappeared from Bumblebee Creek, their legacy endured. The investigation into their crimes continued for months, but the sisters were never found. Their trail went cold near the Mexican border, and despite reports suggesting they may have crossed into Sonora, no concrete evidence ever surfaced to confirm their whereabouts. Some historians believe they might have used false identities to establish new lives, while others suggest they may have died in hiding, their final fates forever unknown. The impact of the McKenzie sisters' crimes, however, was far-reaching. In the aftermath of their disappearance, the local community was forced to confront the dark side of the frontier. The authorities were criticized for their slow response to the disappearance of multiple men and their failure to investigate the McKenzies sooner. The case of the McKenzie sisters was a stark reminder of how easily criminals could exploit the lawlessness of the frontier, manipulating both officials and residents to maintain their operations. Though the Copper Queen was eventually sold off and passed through several hands, it was never able to operate successfully again. Local legends grew around the building, and tales of ghostly sightings and eerie happenings spread like wildfire. Some claimed to have heard strange noises coming from the rooms at night, while others reported cold spots and a feeling of unease whenever they entered the saloon. It seemed as though the McKenzie sisters' dark presence lingered long after their escape. In 1887, the Copper Queen was destroyed in a fire of suspicious origin. Local authorities claimed it was an accident, but many believed the fire was set deliberately, either by the community's residents or by someone seeking to erase the legacy of the McKenzie sisters. The building's destruction marked the end of an era in Bumblebee Creek, but the story of the sisters lived on. As time passed, the McKenzie sisters became a part of Arizona's dark folklore. Their crimes, once buried beneath the shifting sands of the desert, were resurrected through the work of historians and criminologists. The case of the McKenzie sisters became a chilling reminder of the dangers that lurked behind the most innocent facades, and the community's role in either enabling or ignoring evil. Their story continues to captivate those fascinated by frontier crime, and it remains one of the most disturbing chapters in Arizona's Wild West history. The McKenzie sisters weren't just women who ran a saloon. They were master manipulators, predators who understood the psychology of the frontier and exploited it for their own gain. Their story serves as a warning about the fragility of trust and the power of manipulation in a world where lawlessness often prevails. The case of the McKenzie sisters is one of the most chilling and disturbing episodes in Arizona's Wild West history. In a time and place where lawlessness was the norm and justice often depended on the whim of those in power, the sisters exploited the very system that should have protected the innocent. Their calculated operation, which targeted vulnerable men with wealth, lasted for over a year before the truth finally came to light. But by then, it was too late for the many victims who had crossed the threshold of the Copper Queen Saloon, unaware of the horrors that awaited them. What makes the story of the McKenzie sisters so unsettling isn't just the brutality of their crimes. It's how they were able to carry them out with relative impunity. The combination of their charm, social standing, and manipulation of local officials allowed them to continue their operation without detection for far too long. They understood the psychology of their victims and the social dynamics of the frontier, using both to their advantage. In a world where people were eager to believe in the civility of those who presented themselves as respectable, the McKenzies wore their masks well. Their escape, just as calculated as their crimes, ensured that the sisters would never face the justice they so clearly deserved. Despite the evidence that eventually came to light, the McKenzie sisters vanished without a trace, leaving behind only their legacy of fear and tragedy. Their disappearance left the community shaken, but it also served as a stark reminder of the dangers of complacency and the ability of criminals to operate within a system that overlooks the vulnerable. The McKenzie sisters' story is one that challenges our assumptions about justice and morality. It's a dark reflection of how easily people can be manipulated and how often the truth is hidden behind a veil of civility and charm. Their tale is a warning about the fragility of trust and the dangers of ignoring the signs of wrongdoing when they seem too far removed from our daily lives. In the end, the McKenzie sisters remain a haunting chapter in Arizona's history. Their story lives on not just in the pages of history books, but in the collective memory of those who still remember the dark legacy they left behind. If this story has left you disturbed or thinking about the nature of frontier justice, don't forget to subscribe to Grave of the Shadows. Leave a comment below with your thoughts on the McKenzie sisters and the chilling impact of their crimes. Stay tuned for more tales from the shadows.